When I was 9 or 10 years old, a major change occurred in our lives. My father got a new job with a very high salary, which led us to move from our small, modest home in a rural area of Pennsylvania to Brookmont, Maryland. When I say circumstances forced us to move, that might not be entirely accurate. In truth, my parents were overjoyed about this new opportunity. The decision was made very quickly, and within just a month, we found ourselves moving from an old, rundown house in a relatively low-income area to a massive property in one of Maryland's most prestigious suburbs. Of course, you might wonder how I felt about this, being a child at that age. The truth is, I didn't feel much. Perhaps this was because I was naturally an introverted and unsocial child. I didn't have a large group of friends or even close friends to worry about leaving behind. Years later, my parents told me that one of the reasons for this move was to give me a fresh start, but back then, that point didn't seem very significant to me. The move wasn't troubling, and I quickly adapted to the new situation. Of course, adapting was easy, given the newfound financial comfort we suddenly found ourselves in. Even at a young age, I understood that our family would no longer face financial difficulties. The new house was very large, but I won't go into the details of its interior, as that might not interest you. What you should know is that I had 2 older brothers, Sean and Harold. Although we enjoyed the house in general, the backyard was the highlight of everything. The yard was sprawling and vast, filled with dense, interwoven trees. It was our perfect playground. We spent countless hours playing hide and seek or whatever other games we could come up with. But the most remarkable feature of the yard was the treehouse located at the far end of the property. Calling it a treehouse doesn't quite do it justice. It was more like a massive tree fortress. It wasn't just an ordinary structure my father built over a weekend. It was a professional, elaborate project spanning 6 or 7 adjacent trees. It had 3 different floors and an actual staircase, not just flimsy wooden planks like most tree houses. For a long time, the tree house became our daily retreat. My brothers and I spent every day there, playing and having fun. It was always the best part of our day. But as time went on, things began to change. My older brothers, who were nearing their teenage years, started losing interest in the treehouse. That awkward stage of life where nothing seems fun anymore had begun. Eventually, I found myself alone in the treehouse. I felt lonely and sad that they had abandoned the place that once brought us together, but it no longer mattered to them, no matter how much I tried to convince them to return. One day, while I was playing alone in the treehouse, I found a folded piece of paper in one of the corners. To this day, the words written on that paper are etched into my memory. "Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man, nice to meet you. What's your name?" In that moment, I felt a rush of excitement. I was sure that this note was just a game my brothers had created to lure me back to the treehouse and add some fun. So, I decided to play along with this mysterious game. In the same spot where I found the note, there was a small pile of papers I hadn't noticed before. I took one, grabbed a pen, and wrote my name in childish handwriting, then placed the paper back in the same spot. That night, as I returned home, I thought hard about asking my brothers who the Marshmallow Man was, but I held back. I was afraid that asking might end the game. I decided to stay quiet and see what would happen next. In the following days, I would rush to the treehouse as soon as I got home from school. Every time, I found a new note waiting for me. At first, the note seemed quite ordinary, resembling messages my brothers might write if they were joking around. I was having a great time playing this game, but then something strange began to happen. The note started to take a more peculiar turn. The Marshmallow Man began asking me strange personal questions I didn't fully understand at that age. He asked things like, "What's your favorite time to play outside?" Or, "What do you usually have for breakfast?" I don't remember all the questions in those notes, but there is one question I'll never forget. "Which window is your bedroom window?" Looking back on this question now, I feel a deep sense of fear. But at the time, I still thought it was just a game, so I answered as usual. Then, a note came that was completely different. Its words were so strange that they made me feel uncomfortable. It said something like, "What does your pajamas smell like?" I felt a mix of anger and disgust. I decided to confront my brothers. I ran home and told them everything, demanding that they stop this ridiculous prank. What happened next shocked me. My brothers denied everything. Not only did they deny it, but they also began to mock me and accuse me of still living in a fantasy world. I felt frustrated and deeply saddened, and I decided that I wouldn't let this matter go. I didn't go to my parents. Instead, I decided to catch the culprit myself. That night, as I sat in my room, I heard a faint tapping sound on my window. I froze in place as soon as I heard it. At the time, I was already afraid of the dark, so the tapping sound added a new layer of terror I wasn't prepared for. My heart raced as if it would leap out of my chest, and I couldn't move. I sat on my bed in the dark, trying to convince myself that the sound was just my imagination, or maybe my brothers trying to scare me as part of the game. Time passed painfully slowly, and as I listened, the sound grew clearer. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep, even though fear consumed me. The next morning, I gathered my courage and opened the curtains to see what was outside the window. I was shocked to find dozens of marshmallows stuck to the outside of the glass. I nearly screamed in surprise. I was sure this was my brother's doing. I was furious, and I didn't find it funny at all. I decided it was time to catch them red-handed. Throughout the day, I acted as though I hadn't noticed anything and didn't say a word to anyone. I was preparing for confrontation. When night fell, I was fully ready. I took my position by the window, waiting for any movement. When I heard the tapping again, I jumped out of bed and flung the curtains open, ready to shout at them. But what I saw outside the window was far beyond anything I could have expected. There was a man. It wasn't my brothers, nor was it anyone familiar. It was an old man with a disturbing appearance. His eyes were yellowish, and his teeth looked decayed. His hair was sparse, and his face bore a strange expression, a mix of malice and a smile. When he saw me looking at him, he grinned in a chilling way, as if he had been waiting for that moment. I don't think I've ever screamed louder than I did at that moment. It felt as though my life had frozen, and I was about to lose consciousness from sheer fear. I screamed at the top of my lungs, causing my parents to rush into my room in a panic. But by the time they arrived, the man had completely vanished. What followed felt like a nightmare. I told them everything I had seen, and they couldn't believe it. My father immediately called the police, and an intense search began. The police searched every corner of the backyard, including the treehouse that I had once considered my safe haven. They also combed the surrounding area, but they found no trace of the man. Some neighbors came out of their homes to see what was happening. When my father explained the story, shock was evident on their faces. I overheard one of them whisper something to my father about strange incidents in the past in the same area, but I didn't understand what they were talking about. Although the police took all the notes I had found as evidence, I doubt they did anything serious with them. All I know is that the man never appeared again after that night. My parents told me never to return to the treehouse, and I had no intention of doing so after what happened. Years later, I moved away from that house to a different place, but my parents still live there. When I visit them occasionally, I find myself staring at the treehouse for a long time. The place still holds memories, some beautiful, some terrifying. That event remains one of the most frightening experiences of my life, a memory I will never forget. This event has been on my mind a lot lately. My youngest son, Jack, has just gone to university, and while I feel very proud of him, the house is quieter than ever, calmer than I expected, and if I'm honest, this calmness has become something strange for me. The funny thing about it is that when the children were little, I always imagined that I would have this kind of tranquility at home, but when it finally came, it was not as I expected. I don't know exactly why, but I felt that his absence had closed part of my mind, a part one had completely forgotten. As I told others and my wife Mary, it was normal to think about the childhood memories of our children at such times, and this is not very surprising. But I still remember how young Jack was, full of energy and curiosity, always picking up things around him and occupying himself with countless activities. He was always in motion, never ceasing to discover the world around him. One of the memories that I still remember vividly despite the passage of years was in childhood when he was 8 years old. That memory was not just moments of joy. It was filled with something strange that I could not explain until now. I am an experienced carpenter. I am always good at manual work. I have always loved small projects that I start at home. One of the projects that was special for me was the construction of a treehouse in our yard for Jack. It was not just a simple wooden structure. Rather, it was a place completely in the trees with walls and a roof and wooden stairs leading to the entrance. I wanted this place to be a special place for him, where he feels part of our big house, and I was very proud of him. Even today, this house still stands in the courtyard. But my wife Mary was not enthusiastic about it at first. She was worried that the place would be too far from the ground, and emphasized that she feared for Jack's safety. But Jack was the kind of guy who liked to climb trees, and I thought that if he used a ladder instead of climbing branches, he would be safer. And in the end, Mary was convinced of the matter. I want to tell you a little about the location of our house in order for the picture to be clearer. Our house was on the last dead-end street in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by forests. The backyard was bordered by the forest, which is why we immediately loved this place. We were looking for a quiet place, isolating us from the noise of the city, and this place was perfect for that. I still laugh when I remember how many times friends and family got lost trying to get to our house. Although our yard was not huge, I could always see the treehouse from our bedroom window. That was one of the reasons I built the house there, because I wanted to be able to keep an eye on Jack if anything unexpected happened. The days passed normally for a long time, and Jack spent a lot of his time playing inside the treehouse. His older brother was already past that stage, so Jack often played alone there. And then we noticed something strange. He started talking about an imaginary friend named Leo. At first, we didn't care much. It was not unusual for children to have imaginary friends. Jack was 8 years old, but I began to feel that there was something strange in this. Jack was not the kind of person to make up such stories. He was always very practical for this. I had a feeling that maybe there was something behind this imaginary friend. Then it started to get more mysterious. We noticed that Jack was spending more time in the treehouse, and it seemed strange. Strangely enough, he did not bring any toys with him. He seemed to be playing only using his imagination. He was not carrying any gaming device or something to help him entertain. I had previously told Jack not to carry anything to the treehouse because of the danger of falling. But what caught my attention was that he was going there without any toys at all. One day, I decided to ask him about it. And when I asked him, Jack behaved very strangely. Leo was very shy and didn't like to talk about himself, he told me. And when I asked him why he goes to the treehouse all the time, he replied that Leo only likes to play in the treehouse, and he doesn't like to enter the house. That was a strange answer for me. Why does he keep playing with an imaginary friend? And why doesn't he like to play anywhere else? But I decided to let it go. As for Mary, she was worried about the situation. She believed that Jack had become obsessed with this imaginary friend, and she began to worry about his psychological state. I was also worried, but we didn't want to get too involved. We were not the kind of parents who interfere in every detail of their children's lives. We believe that children need some freedom as long as they are good at school and do their homework. And Jack always played with the children in the neighborhood, rode bicycles, played games with them. He spent most of his weekends outside until the sun went down. But one day, Jack came home with 2 injured eyes. His eyes were swollen and bruises were clearly visible on him. When I asked him why, he kept looking at the ground and said nothing. I insisted that he tell me what happened, and in the end, he told me that Leo was in a fight with him. At first, I didn't believe what he said. He told me that he was in a fight with Leo, this imaginary friend he had. I tried to talk to him more, but Jack started crying and ran to his room. Mary was convinced that he got into a quarrel with one of the children in the neighborhood, but he did not want to admit it. She wanted me to immediately remove the treehouse, but I could not agree to this. I decided to investigate it myself. I went up to the treehouse the next day, and when I entered, I saw something that made me nauseous. There were socks and shoes scattered around the place, and they were dirty and torn. None of them belonged to Jack, and these shoes also did not belong to any other child in the neighborhood. It was clear that these things did not belong to him, but what was most surprising were the drawings on the walls. They were drawings of wild animals, such as a bear and a fox, and some birds. The drawings were very strange, and one of them showed a terrifyingly huge spider. Jack later told me that Leo liked to take food with him to the treehouse, and that the shoes I found belonged to him. He confirmed that he repeatedly forgot about her. This was very strange. From that moment on, she decides to prevent Jack from returning to the treehouse. I had a strong feeling that he was lying, that he was making up stories to cover something strange. I also began to notice changes in Jack's behavior. He seemed to be acting strangely, and he was refusing to talk about Leo. Although Mary was worried about his psychological state, there were moments that made us think that there might be something strange going on. One night, while I was watching from the bedroom window, I noticed a movement near the treehouse. At first, I thought that Jack was disobeying orders, but when I got closer, I found out that it was not Jack. He was another child, weak and exhausted, dressed in dirty clothes and trying to climb the stairs leading to the treehouse. I ran outside, but as soon as I opened the back door, the child rushed into the forest. I tried to chase him, but he quickly disappeared among the trees. Mary called all the parents in the neighborhood. We made sure that all the children were at home. We called the police, who sent teams to search the forest, but they found nothing. There was no evidence to explain what happened. But then, Jack told us about Leo. Leo was a magical boy, living in the forest with his animal friends, he said. He was trying to convince Jack to join him to that forest. After this incident, Leo strangely disappeared from Jack's life, and we never heard from him again. This happened just a few weeks ago, and it's still stuck in my mind. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Virginia, but I am a second-year student at a university in Oregon. This event happened during the autumn holidays in October when I returned home for a few days. I come home every chance I can find, and sometimes I feel that returning is a mixed feeling between happiness and bitterness. I like to see my parents, but they are very conservative, and this makes the atmosphere stuffy at times. One of the things that bothers me very much is their constant concern about the topic of cannabis. Although it has been legalized in the state recently, my parents get angry if they find out that I smoke. They are not yet used to the idea that I have become an adult. I can't quite understand why they are in this position, but in the end, they are my parents, and I can't be disrespectful to them, especially living under their roof. When I'm at home, it becomes a matter of careful sneaking around to avoid them finding out what I'm doing. I hate to admit it, but I've become a pro at sneaking around them over the past few years. I can't count how many times I snuck out of the house late at night, not to mention all the other things I've been doing in the past. My parents have very sensitive noses, so I can't smoke inside the house. Fortunately, the tree house that my parents built for me when I was little is still standing in the front yard. Although it has been corroded and is making wooden noises in some places, it is still surprisingly strong. It is located high among the trees, which makes it completely hidden from view, especially from the house. From where he is, I can see the courtyard, the street, some windows of the house, but no one can see me unless he knows where to look. When I was younger, this tree house was the place I would run to when I needed some calm, and if you knew me as a child, you would know that I needed to escape reality a lot. It's hard to talk about all the memories that come back to me now, but I'll let that go. On the Saturday when I was supposed to return to my university, my parents were out at a party or something similar, and they were going to stay out until late at night. I knew they wouldn't be back soon, but I didn't know exactly when they would be back. I didn't want to risk being in the backyard, so I decided to go to the tree house with my stash there just to keep things safe. It was cold, and I could see my breath in the cold air. I have a theory that cold weather increases human nostalgia, but maybe this is just a subjective feeling. The place was very quiet, and it was great to be the only one around. I have always liked being in a high place, and this added something special to my experience. I watched the sunset, and I was thinking about going back to university. By the time I finished, it was almost dark, which means I had completed everything in time. Then I noticed something strange. While I was watching the yard, one of the lights in the house suddenly came on. I froze in place, knowing that I was the only one at home. My heart began to beat rapidly as I stared out the window. I felt an instinctive sense of fear, a feeling that comes only when there is a real danger. My field of vision began to narrow around the light, as if it were attracting me to it. A few moments later, a movement in the backyard caught my attention, which brought me out of the state of detachment I was in. There were 3 masked people approaching the property and trying to move quickly. I felt a sore stomach when I realized what was happening. I followed them as they moved towards the front stairs, and that's when a 4th person opened the door and let them in. I felt a tightness in my chest when I realized what was happening. My house was being robbed. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't close my eyes. Part of me was still in shock, and another was trying to convince himself that maybe I was mistaken in what I was seeing. This is the best way I can describe how I felt at that moment. Someone remained outside, wandering around the yard. At that moment, I suddenly realized that I was holding my phone open on the call application. Without thinking, I called 911 and whispered into the phone, trying to keep as calm as possible. I told the operator what was happening and quickly hung up. But while I was holding the phone away, the light that came from the screen must have caught someone's attention because he suddenly raised his head to look at the trees. I quickly hid, but I was worried that he saw me. And only 3 seconds later, I heard his voice calling loudly, "Hello." The voice was clearly directed at me. I looked around one of the planks and saw a dark person heading towards me. He knew exactly where I was. I was sure of it. He reached the base of the tree and began to climb the wooden planks leading to the treehouse. She screamed, saying that the police were on the way in the hope that it would scare him, but he continued to climb. He kept going up while his hands were sweeping the planks as if he was determined to reach me. Without thinking, I grabbed the closest thing to me. It was a bong, and threw it with all my might. She hits him in the head, and he shatters into pieces, letting out a loud scream before falling to the ground. It was not very high, but it was enough to make him rethink. Instead of going up again, he ran back towards the house, shouting at the other people who were inside the house. Moments later, I saw the 4 of them running into the backyard. My heart was still beating fast. It wasn't long before the police arrived. I was shaking so badly when I came down from the tree house that I even thought I might fall. I tried to tell them what happened, but my words were very confused. I told them I couldn't see their faces clearly, or even the car they used. My father arrived a short time later. They were very understanding of what happened, and that was a good thing. The police told us that the robbers most likely knew that my parents would be out of the house that night. The operation seemed to be prepared in advance, but what they did not expect was my presence there. I still don't know how I feel about this. I don't want to think about what would have happened if that person had reached the treehouse. I'm back at university now, but if I'm honest, I haven't been able to sleep well since that incident. I am afraid that these people may return, and even more afraid that my parents are there alone. My heart is in constant tension for their safety, and I just hope that this will not be the last we hear about. I hope I don't have to provide updates, but if something else happens, God forbid, I will. When I was a child, I had a terrible experience in our house where I grew up. My family moved into this house when I was 4 years old, so I don't remember much about the house we lived in before we moved. We lived in what I called my childhood home from the age of 4 until I was 14. That is, for 10 whole years. This house had a special character for me, and I loved it very much. I have a lot of beautiful memories of that period spent in this house. In fact, my childhood years were full of happy moments there. After we moved from Normandy in France to Manchester in the UK when I was at the beginning of high school, I was very shocked by this sudden change. But that's not the story I want to tell you now. In the backyard of our house, there was an amazing treehouse. This house was built by the previous owner, who had created it for his children. However, for us, the brothers Alexander and John, it was a fundamental attraction. When my father visited the house for the first time, it was one of the points that made it the perfect place for us to live, as the backyard was full of places where children could play safely. My brother Alexander is 2 years older than me. He was 6 years old when my father bought the house. It was clear that both of us were very excited about the idea of a tree house, and my father always said that we were especially excited about this side of the house. We would spend many hours playing there, meeting friends who became part of our memories. But over time, I began to stop playing in the tree house. By the time I was 12, I was more interested in other things, and I thought I had moved on from playing in a place like this. However, that age was also a period of rebellion and problems for me. I was facing a lot of sanctions from my parents for my actions and behavior at school. I was hitting delivery deadlines and was always having problems with teachers, and sometimes I would get up and yell at my parents. That was a stage full of internal conflicts, and the relationship between my parents and me was full of tensions. And one weekend, my father decided to punish me because of a repeated complaint from the school counselor about my behavior and academic performance. At that moment, I was in a state of great anger. I felt as if I hated my father. That night, I refused to sleep at home and decided to go to the tree house in the garden. This was not the first time I had done something similar, and it was a small way to rebel against the rules that my parents imposed on me. I would take my pillow and blanket and go to the tree house to sleep there away from everyone. My dad was aware of this behavior, but didn't care much. He thought I was just a kid trying to make a little fuss. But what my parents didn't know at the time was that I had taken my Nintendo DS with me. Although I wasn't allowed to play video games or watch TV, I decided to play Animal Crossing for hours on end. I was so engrossed in playing that I forgot the time until I got tired and finally decided to sleep. But I think I hadn't slept much when I suddenly woke up to a strange voice whispering from outside. "Tommy, Tommy." I was still half asleep when I heard this sound, and it sounded like I was in a dream. It sounded like the voice of an adult man, not my father's. "Tommy, are you there?" The voice said, and I remember that it was deep, and it stirred my heart at that moment. I stopped responding, and at that moment I felt something strange in me. I felt something uncomfortable running through my body. My heart was beating fast. I heard him approaching the ladder that led to the treehouse, as his steps were making their way upwards, and the sound was getting clearer. Then, in that gloomy darkness, I saw something strange, something that I could not explain. I saw a shadow of a person's head approaching the hole in the roof of the treehouse. I couldn't see his facial features clearly, but I saw the shape of his head, and it was very strange and disturbing. He said in a faint voice, "There you are." My heart panicked, and I answered without thinking, "Dad?" But the person did not answer, and remained standing in the dark. About 20 seconds of heavy silence passed as I was watching this figure, and he was watching me, as if we were in an endless confrontation. I waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, but something seemed to me that this was not my father. I got up from my place, ran to the window of the treehouse, where I began to scream at the top of my voice. "Dad!" When I did that, I saw the light in my father's room come on, and I heard his footsteps rushing up the stairs to rush out of the house. Moments later, Mom and Dad burst into the garden through the back door, quickly running towards the treehouse. My father was in a panic and swore to me that it was not he who was there. There was no joking about it. My uncle, who was a police officer at that time, was informed about the incident, so my father decided to contact him for his advice. The next day, my uncle prepared a report on the incident, but there was not much that could be given. All I could say was that I heard a man's deep voice and saw the shadow of his head, and he knew my name. There wasn't much the police could do in that case. Since then, I have never been to the treehouse again. For several years after that incident, my father thought that a neighbor might be behind it, but he could not prove it. And for several years, whenever I met this neighbor outside, and we exchanged greetings, I was trying to remember the voice I heard that night. But I couldn't remember it clearly enough for comparison. This mystery still occupies my mind today, as this experience gives me a strange feeling that I cannot explain.